I'm going to be talking about the story of his short life, searching for a way to forget it. Dennis Wilson was born in 1944 and grew up in Hawthorne, California. He had two brothers, and his aggressive father was very hard on all three boys, but especially on Dennis. The other kids even had a nickname for this black sheep of the family, Dennis the Menace. They didn't really fit in with his two brothers, and they were about to make that very, very clear. It was his brother Brian who had the idea to form a band. He was busy assembling the right musicians, which included his brother Carl, his cousin Mike Love, and a friend named Al Jardine. The glaring omission in the band was Dennis. He was into surfing and chasing girls and didn't have much interest in music. That's when their mother stepped in and changed history. Wilson's mom, Audrey, told Brian that he had to include his little brother in his band, and Brian reluctantly agreed. Dennis had learned to play the bass, but was also trying out the drums and was now interested in joining his brothers. Dennis joined the band, and they called themselves the Pendletones. Surprisingly, it was he who suggested they sing about surfing. In fact, he also insisted that his brother write the song Surfing, the tune that became the Pendletones' first hit. Dennis was so happy when the song hit the radio that he ran down the street screaming with joy. Of course, this meant money for the band members, something that Dennis wasn't ready to deal with. Soon the Wilsons' father stepped in to manage the boys as they made their slow and steady rise to the top. When the record company released Surfing, Wilson and the band got a shock. The label had renamed them the Beach Boys. While Brian and Carl put some of their money in investments or savings, the first thing Dennis did with his newfound wealth was leave the family home and get his own place in Hollywood. He also wasted money by paying for his friends when they went out. While musically, Dennis certainly wasn't the most important member of the band, some fans thought he was. Wilson's good looks attracted the attention of many of the female fans. In fact, sometimes they would run right by the other members just to get to Dennis. He could hardly stop this behavior, but his brother Brian soon had enough. According to a friend of Dennis, Brian was extremely envious of all the attention that his brother was getting. It was so bad that he didn't even want to get on stage with him. In 1965, Brian couldn't take the pressure of performing anymore and had a nervous breakdown. He said he was through with touring with the Beach Boys, and later confessed that his jealousy of Phil Spector and the Beatles' success was also a major factor. When Brian announced that he wouldn't tour anymore, Dennis went ballistic. He picked up the heaviest thing he could find, a huge ashtray, and threatened to throw it at anyone who wouldn't leave the room. The thing was, Dennis knew the truth. He knew that without his brother, the Beach Boys didn't exist. Brian was having his own emotional problems, and he thought it was a good time to put his brother more front and center on stage. Brian made sure that Dennis had more lead singing roles on their 1965 album, The Beach Boys Today. While he enjoyed filling this new role, he also began enjoying something far more nefarious. After finding his voice with the Beach Boys, Dennis discovered something else, psychedelics, his use of which kept him from being a reliable part of the band, and so Brian started using a session musician on the drums. When Dennis was ready and able, he played. When he wasn't, his job went to the session musician. His contribution to the Beach Boys was in decline, and things were about to get even worse. One of the Beach Boys' most influential albums is Pet Sounds. Due to his substance use, Dennis barely had anything to do with it. Then the Beach Boys gave their next album an insulting working title. Allegedly, they used the name Dumb Angel, an apparent reference to Dennis. After a few failed attempts at songwriting, Dennis hit it big with Little Bird. The tough guy surprised everyone with a sentimental song about connecting with nature. One critic even called it a minor masterpiece. But Dennis was just getting started. On the next album, he tried his hand at producing. In April of 1968, Dennis was freshly divorced from his wife of 3 years and ready to party. He picked up a couple of female hitchhikers in Malibu and brought them to his home. There they told him about their spiritual guru. Dennis left the two women at his home and went to a recording session. When he got back, he couldn't believe his eyes. When he pulled up to his house, he saw that the lights were on and that there was a school bus parked outside. There was also a menacing man standing there waiting for him. Dennis soon learned that this man was Charles Manson, the guru the two women had told him about. Dennis had no idea what Manson wanted, but he knew he was afraid of him. But instead of hurting Dennis, Manson got down on his hands and knees and started laying kisses on his feet. When he entered his house, Dennis came face to face with about 12 people who were now occupying the place. Dennis actually didn't mind having the strangers, who were mostly women, in his house. After all, Manson shared his psychedelics, and he also shared the women. These followers would do anything for Manson. Not only would they sleep with Dennis, but Manson got them to clean and cook too. But this wasn't a free service. Dennis soon found himself paying through the nose for Manson and his family. They had expensive tastes, and Dennis was the one who had to pay for them. While they lived with him, Manson and his followers bought clothes, cars, food, and something more surprising: penicillin for their many bouts of gonorrhea. Yes, it was a non-stop party, but the jaw-dropping final bill eventually landed at Dennis Wilson's feet, and it was not pretty. By the end of this bender, he owed about $100,000, almost $900,000 today. The truth was, Dennis had handed over more than half of his savings. Though he bankrolled the Manson family, he wasn't exactly living the high life himself. He later said that while the Manson family were partying, he took up residence in just one room in his house where he only had one candle. In spite of this, he said he was happy finding himself. One thing Manson wanted was a record contract, and it wasn't long before Dennis introduced him to his friends in the industry, like singer Neela Young and a talent scout named Greg Jacobson. Both Young and Jacobson thought that Manson was interesting, but neither could help him with his career. Dennis brought him to his brother's recording studio, where he recorded a few songs, but Manson quickly sensed that all was not well between Dennis and his brothers, and this led him to write a song for the Beach Boys. The song "Cease to Exist" was apparently to help heal the relationship between the siblings. This would eventually be recorded as the song "Never Learn Not to Love," credited to Dennis Wilson. Around this time, Dennis realized that Manson was a little creepy. Sadly, this realization came too late. Eventually, Dennis began to see Manson not so much as a friend, but as someone to be afraid of. Unfortunately, the problem was that he still had a house full of Manson followers. Dennis took the easy way out and simply walked away from his own home. He moved in with his friend and collaborator, Greg Jacobson, living in his basement apartment. The Manson family soon used up or appropriated everything Dennis owned. Luckily for Dennis, the house itself was a rental, and the lease was soon ending. Before the lease was up, Manson and his followers found themselves evicted. Manson was livid, and he was ready to take out his anger on Dennis. Manson's anger led him to send Dennis threatening messages that contained a slug from a rifle. Dennis knew how dangerous Manson was. Much later, Beach Boys member Mike Love confessed in his memoir that Dennis told him he'd seen Manson use an M16 rifle to shoot a man in half. Seeing Manson commit such an outrageous act took its toll on Dennis. It made him freeze with fear, and reportedly, he even contemplated ending his own life. In the end, he chose not to alert the authorities about what Manson had done. Unfortunately, Dennis, keeping what he knew to himself, left Manson free to unleash terror on some unsuspecting people. Another person, Wilson, had introduced Manson to was record producer Terry Melcher, who was the son of Hollywood sweetheart Doris Day. Melcher didn't offer Manson a contract, and Manson would eventually get a deranged revenge. He knew Melcher's address, and on August 8, 1969, he sent some of his followers there. What Manson didn't know was that Melcher had moved out and actress Sharon Tate had moved in. By the end of the night, Sharon Tate and her 3 companions were all dead in a sadistic bloodbath. Even though Dennis hadn't introduced Manson to Sharon Tate, he had connected Manson to 150 CELO Drive. Soon after the Manson family's murderous spree, Manson himself showed up at Dennis's home, where he told Dennis that he'd been to the moon. Besides relaying that vague piece of information, he also asked for some much-needed cash. Dennis complied, and Manson left him in peace. A while after Manson left, Dennis found out about Sharon Tate and her guests, but hadn't yet made any connection to Manson. When the authorities caught Manson and his cohorts, the headlines were out there. Dennis Wilson's ex-friend Manson had been the mastermind behind this horrific event. The district attorney's office wanted Wilson on the stand to testify against Manson and other members of the notorious family, but he was terrified by the prospect. Fortunately, the DA also had Greg Jacobson to testify against the Manson family members, but that wasn't the only reason why they gave up on Wilson. Terry Melcher said that Wilson was having trouble separating reality from fantasy. Around this time, Wilson received an out-of-the-blue offer. A director named Monty Hellman was working on a film about street racing, and he seemed intent on hiring musicians as actors. He had James Taylor as the lead and was in desperate need of another male actor. That's when a friend of the casting director gave Wilson's name as a potential choice. Tulane Blacktop received mixed reviews, but later went on to become a cult classic. Wilson, not thrilled with the movie business, turned to romance. In 1970, he married Barbara Charon, who many say was Wilson's true love. He wrote Lady and Barbara for her, and the couple went on to have 2 children. The Beach Boys record label were happy with Dennis's songwriting abilities. Tracks like Forever and Slip On Through were standouts, and the label believed that his contributions had a more contemporary feel to them than other Beach Boys tunes. Dennis had prepared 2 songs for the 1971 Beach Boys album Surf's Up, 4th of July, and Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live Again? Surprisingly, when the album came out, neither song was on it. Dennis later said that he pulled the songs because they didn't flow with the rest of the album. However, the band's manager had another story to tell. According to him, there was friction between bandmates behind the scenes, and Dennis desired to hold back his songs for his own solo album. That album was Pacific Ocean Blue, and it ended up doing better than the 2 Beach Boys albums that followed it. In the years following the horrific events on CELO Drive, Dennis couldn't escape the memory of Manson. Allegedly, members of the Manson family began calling him. Their message was just 2 terrifying words: "You're next." Many believe that Wilson's ensuing struggle with addiction stemmed from the tragedy his affiliation with Manson had created. Dennis continued to drink heavily, and his substance problem escalated. In September 1977, he told Rolling Stone magazine that he had quit the Beach Boys because they couldn't accept that he had a successful solo album. Dennis headed down a dangerous path, and in '79 he found someone to take the journey with him. In '79, now divorced from Karen, Dennis started dating Fleetwood Mac's Christine McVie. They lasted 3 years, and then Wilson's dating life took a bizarre turn. He met a woman named Shawn Marie Harris and fell head over heels for her. Then he discovered something disturbing. Shawn claimed to be his bandmate Mike Love's illegitimate child. This sent Dennis for a loop, but he still wanted to marry her. Remember, Mike Love wasn't just Wilson's bandmate. He was also his cousin. There was now the question as to whether this marriage would even be legal. As it turned out, it is legal to marry your cousin's daughter, so marry they did. Mike Love never officially acknowledged that Shawn was his child, and, of course, this turn of events did nothing to repair the damaged relationship between him and Dennis. On top of this, the tensions were about to increase exponentially. In 1981, Brian Wilson's girlfriend, Carolyn Williams, had a complaint about Dennis. She said that he was trying to get Brian to participate in a rather large purchase of illicit substances to the tune of $15,000. The Beach Boys had had it with Dennis. They told him he had to check into rehab, or else he'd suffer the consequences. They wouldn't let him perform with them any longer. He checked into a therapy center in Arizona and then a hospital in Santa Monica. On Christmas Day, Dennis was not in a good way. He left the hospital and went to the Santa Monica Bay Inn, where he got into a fight. Alone and wounded, he went to the hospital to have his injuries tended to, and then started drinking again. In his inebriated state, he had a strange idea. Years before, some of his ex-wife's belongings had ended up on the ocean floor, near where he kept his yacht. On December 28, 1983, Dennis Wilson decided he wanted to retrieve these belongings. A very inebriated Wilson walked straight into the Pacific Ocean and drowned. His widow was certain that her husband, a surfer, had wanted an ocean burial. The law stated that full-body burials at sea were only for Coast Guard and Navy members, and that all others had to go through cremation. The Wilson brothers strongly opposed this option, and that's when support came from a very unlikely source. President Ronald Reagan heard about the burial problem and decided to make an exception for Dennis Wilson. Now, he could finally rest in peace in the ocean he loved so much. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.